Access control threats. When you are looking at the world and seeing what can harm you, the first thing you have to start with, again, is what are you trying to protect? What is it that you want to secure from? The reason I say that is we spend a lot of time and effort and energy worrying about threats that have nothing to do with what it is we do, that couldn't possibly harm us. And quite often, we overlook risks that are influential on us, but they're not something that we necessarily notice. Can anyone think of an example of what I'm talking about? In the world of physical security, has anyone ever worked on their seatbelt plan for their office? Why not? Why not? Where are Americans most likely to die?
The kitchen.
Their car.
In their office.
What's that?
I said in their office.
In their office. That's high up on the list, actually. In their car. But we never think of protecting our personnel by ensuring that we have a seatbelt plan or policy. On the other hand, we often plan on a lot of things that aren't necessarily real threats. We're worried about those nation-state hackers going after our networks. Now, this audience, more the exception to the rule because of the nature of the work you do and the clients you have. But for the most part, foreign-trained espionage agents are not trying to crack into most networks. That's just not who's doing it. It's the 13-year-old Canadian kids who's doing it. So when you're making your identification of these things, you have to know what's trying to attack you so you know how to protect against it. You have to know the motivation. You have to know the capabilities. You have to know the techniques. It's the old cliche of you have to think like the criminal to be able to defeat them, right? Plus, you have to know your own systems. You have to know them enough to know the strengths and weaknesses thereof and what kind of countermeasures you're going to put in place. Just because all countermeasures exist, you don't necessarily have to use them all. Defense in depth doesn't mean everything including the kitchen sink. It means identifying those that are most cost-effective and useful. So let's look at different types of threats. DOS and DDoS. What's DDoS compared to denial of service?
One's distributed.
The extra D is distributed denial of service. Instead of staging it from one machine, I'm going to use a whole bunch of machines at the same time. In the old days, SYN floods were a very popular, very easy way of doing it. Anyone know what a SYN flood is or can describe how it works? Brent, go for it.
You're sending a lot of, usually on a web server, SYN to open up like a three-way handshake, and if you ever do it too much, the server's going to get all confused. And
Good. Because the three-way hand, good. Right. Mostly you now have servers that can identify these things and refuse them, so it's not that big a deal. But any kind of disruption of your use of services can be a form of denial of service. And that can be anything. That can be people sitting in your building taking up all the time of all the people, of all your personnel. That can be power loss to your building, can be a denial of service attack. Another way of doing it is a buffer overflow. What's a buffer? Buffer. Memory, temporary storage. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, and by overflowing it sometimes, and again, most systems nowadays out of the box recognize these things and react accordingly. TCP session overloads, DDoS intensifies. Botnets and zombies, two very popular terms. The guide uses them in a particular way. In general, for the most part, a botnet is a series of computers that have been penetrated by an attacker, usually by a Trojan horse application, and it's all automated from their end. And the attacker can use the resources of that machine to attack another machine. Those machines that are used to stage the attack, those members of the botnet, are often called zombies because they respond to the orders from the attacker. Buffer. Okay. Most software shipped today recognizes the threat of buffer overflows and is programmed accordingly.
Depends on the software.
Now, I want to shop where you're shopping. Good. Mobile code. Somebody name a particularly well-known piece of software that is used for this sort of attack. Nefarious or notorious. Cookies. Good. Good. ActiveX controllers. JavaScript, right? Basically, it's a way to see activity or to use somebody's acceptance of a certain service to make them do something other than they were supposed to do. Malware, we've talked about that already. Trojan horses are the current most popular ones discussed in the media, where it comes in a package with something else. What is the something else, usually?
It's a web bar for IE.
A web bar? You
Yeah,
mean yeah. Those are a lot of them. We're going to give you a search engine or yeah. What was another one?
I just said anything fun.
Anything fun. Games are huge. Pirated entertainment media. Yeah. Good. They suggest that a Trojan doesn't necessarily replicate the way that a virus or a worm would because it has to be packaged in that same fun surrounding. That's one way of looking at it. And that the user had to bring it in, that the machine didn't do it itself. The user at some point had to decide to grab that thing and bring it in. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Worms, what's a worm? Really just self-replicating, has no payload. All it does is denial of service by replicating itself over and over again. Anyone name a real famous one? Probably the first famous one.
The Morris worm?
The Morris worm. All right. Virus also can be self-replicating, but also usually does something, whether it's steal information or whether it's insinuate itself somewhere within the system. And what was the fourth one they were talking about? Spyware. Spyware does what?
Spies on you.
Yeah, it spies on you. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It wants to see user activity and report that back somewhere. Is that always malicious? Not necessarily. There's also forms of adware that do the same thing. I'll let you play this game if you let me watch you browse. Okay. Other forms of threats and attacks. What's the matter? What? What?
Don't make us read that.
Oh, now we want to know.
Yeah,
It has nothing to do with this.
Oh, now we even really want to know more.
That's everything with an Allstate commercial. Did you see the Allstate commercial with he's pretending to be the dog?
No.
You know, the mayhem.
Oh, the guy who was the Beeper King from 30 Rock? That
Yes.
guy? Yeah, I
He's
like
pretending
it.
to be the dog, and he has a bone, and like they're breaking in, and he's like, "Hey,
You guys are
you guys are great." He gave him a bone. It's kind of like what adwares do.
And you thought that wasn't relevant. All right. Other threats. Cracking passwords. Brute force attack just means hammering away at it till you find the right one. Most of those should be defeated by what?
Count lockout.
Count lockout. Good. Good. You should only have a certain number of tries before it gets locked out. Dictionary attack, just like it sounds, using a known set of words to go through as many password variables as possible. That should really be a form of that, right? It's the same kind of thing. We're just going to repeatedly use it, and we're going to use the ones that are most likely. Shoulder surfing, another popular current term, means being a snoop, right? Good. Spoofing, all right, yeah. Pretending to be one thing that's trusted so that you can do untrusted activity. You can spoof all of these things. Some are more difficult to accomplish than others, obviously. Is it real easy to spoof an email? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Is it harder to spoof a MAC address? Yes. What's the thing about spoofing an email or spoofing a MAC address that makes it really tricky? And I'm not talking about the technological sophistication of making your machine look like those things. What is harder about doing the spoofing correctly from the attacker's perspective?
Communicating properly.
Good. They have to be able to establish that line of connection first. And they have to figure out who they're pretending to be. I can get your email pretty easily. That's easy. Knowing what your MAC address is before I try to spoof it, that's the important thing, is I have to find a trusted MAC address before I can spoof it. Good. These are also forms of threats, and they are just like they sound. Basically, all of the tools that we use for securing our networks can be used by attackers to try to penetrate our networks. Which is why when we were talking about NIDs, and we were saying that encryption messes it up because no longer can you see the traffic going across the line, that also helps defeat sniffing and eavesdropping and tapping. If someone can even look at your traffic, capture your traffic, read your traffic, but it's gibberish, that doesn't do them any good. Realistically, how long will something stay encrypted for? Just because it's encrypted, does that mean it's impossible for anyone to ever read it? No. No. But how long? How long is good encryption good for? $100 days. And that's, good encryption. And again, we're talking about different levels of attacks and attackers. Nation-state level stuff can, if they really want to get the data, they can probably get the data and they can probably crack it. But we're talking about most people without a supercomputer or without a vast array of computers. 100 days is a good level of encryption. Each algorithm continues to be poked at by everyone, including mathematicians and researchers, trying to find better ways to crack it. And over the years, as the years progress, that number of days for each of those algorithms comes down. And we'll talk about that more in the encryption module. But 100 days is a good baseline. Emanations. In the DoD, there was this old program called Tempest, where basically the idea was if I could get within proximity of a machine, I could use the electrical field coming off that machine to actually read what that machine was processing. It's very similar to shining a laser at a window and being able to read the vibrations to hear what the people inside are saying. Does that work? Yeah. Does Tempest work? To some extent, more or less. You need some very, very sophisticated capabilities to be able to tap and read that stuff. And it can be attenuated by the materials in the room or the placement of the machines. Tempest was all about maintaining 36 inches distance between units that are operating at different levels of classification. Your classified machine was over here, your unclassified machine was over here. So even though you were communicating on your unclassified machine, you weren't sending out information about your classified machine. You can also put stuff in the walls. What's a Faraday cage?
It's a metal mesh to stop signal.
Yes, you're living inside chicken wire, basically. And there's one trusted connection in and out, and that's how your systems are communicating. Good. So all you have to focus on is that, and it squelches the emanations. Object reuse. When you are done with your hard drives, where do they go?
Straight into your attacker's hands.
I've worked in several places where they've put computers into schools, public schools, because that's a good, nice PR thing for organizations to do. Give them to the kids. In some of those environments, they forgot to wipe the hard drives. They forgot to take the hard drives out. They forgot to even format the hard drives. So basically, the kids are scrolling. And that was all unclass information. I mean, it's the concept of making sure there's a process involved with it, and that just because you're done with something doesn't mean your life cycle has completed your security responsibilities. What's DGossing?
Running a magnet against a hard drive or something to that extent.
Yes.
Sort of.
Yes. A big magnet across it. We used to do that with videotape. This was, never mind, it's not important.
Tell me about it.
In the old days.
Milk eraser.
Yeah, okay. All right. Unauthorized targeted data mining. Data mining itself is not illegal. It's called research. But unauthorized targeted data mining is a threat that could potentially be posed against your network because the attacker wants to know as much about your network as possible before starting the attack. Why? Because it allows them to narrow down the amount of tools that they'll need in their toolbox to do so. They don't spin their wheels wasting a lot of time trying to get in using things that aren't going to work. This can include a lot of unclassified information, an aggregation of data that isn't necessarily something that each and every little piece by itself would tip your hand and allow them to break in, but together they can get a gestalt picture of it and be able to say, okay, now I know what I'm going after. The guide recommends you counter that with awareness, that your users are not divulging information that they don't necessarily have to people who don't have a need to know. Dumpster diving. Anyone ever gone dumpster diving as part of a penetration test? Yeah? How was it?
Dirty as hell.
Yes, it smells, doesn't it, Brent?
Does
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Cans tend to smell.
Yeah. Did you get anything valuable out of it?
Hard drives.
No way. Seriously? In this day and age?
I actually walked by a truck that was sitting in a parking lot that had a whole bunch of just hard drives sitting in the back of it.
Staggers the imagination, doesn't it?
I know.
Brent, did you find anything? Dan?
No comment.
Good. All right. Rock on. Kittens don't count, Dan. All right. Yeah. It's a very old story of going through people's garbage. Realistically, I think we're selling a lot more shredders than we need to. I mean, by and large, if they're going through that much trouble, they're going to find it through a better open source anyway. However, when you find the hard drives on the back of the truck, it's hard to deny that people still are not paying attention to this avenue of disclosure, right?
I think a lot of people will shred paper, though, but they'll throw away, like, hard drives.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point, too. That's a very good point. Anyone ever worked in an environment where you're responsible for accessing hard drives? How'd you do it, Dan?
Oh, we had a giant metal shredder. We threw the hard drives in. It was just
That's cool.
awesome.
Oh, I would find old systems to get rid of just so I could use the metal shredder.
I say, I mean, we degauss, drill, and then pulverize the drives here. So
What do you use for pulverization?
I actually don't know. It's another group inside of IT.
I want to be in that group.
Yeah, they
lasers.
I worked in one office where I wore this to work every day, and we also had sledgehammers and goggles. It was like Office Space. It was just so cool. Oh, that was the highlight of my week. That was so much fun. And hard drives will take some punishment.
Yeah.
You know, for something that crashes anytime I want to use it, breaking one that you want to get rid of is actually difficult. Yeah. You got to open them up before you pulverize them, too, because that's fun. Backdoor, trapdoor attack. What's this? Who puts them there? How do they end up in there in your system? Yeah. I'm sorry? Programmers, disgruntled employees. Yes, those are the two main avenues of backdoor and trapdoors. They weren't always malicious. They aren't always malicious. Sometimes the technician or the maintainer needs to be able to get to them in a way that circumvents all of your access controls. By and large, you don't want those there. You don't want those there. And we'll talk about, I think we got logic bombs coming up too. Hey, look at that. Logic bombs. Again, disgruntled employees leaving a little something behind. And this can be done either on command or it can be a time bomb. They're going to put a malicious operation into effect when a certain condition is made. The apocryphal story, the one big threat that captures the imagination in our field, is that network or system administrator who has full rights, who puts a dead man switch into the logic bomb, meaning every day he comes into work and turns the logic bomb off for 24 hours. The minute he's not coming into work anymore, that logic bomb goes off and everything gets eaten up. There's only one example I can think of that actually kind of took place. There was I'm going to get this wrong, I'm sure. It was a highly detailed metal fabrications firm where they had automated all their machines on the floor for cutting out all the shapes of their custom the forms that their clients were buying. And all of those were stored electronically on one main server, all the plans for cutting out those pieces of metal. When he was leaving, he said, "You don't know how important I am. You should keep me on and you should pay me this much more money." And they laughed at him and he said, "Do it or your company's going to go under," which is how they caught him. And then all those forms dumped. And they lost something like 10,000 discrete ways of cutting this metal, which was basically their entire company. If I remember, he had been in a subsidiary that had been purchased by a larger firm, and he was being replaced by the IT people in the larger firm. And the big fault there, from a security perspective, was not only his, but whose? Who screwed up? Either the IT department or the security department for not having a backup of those 10,000 forms. That's something, if that's your whole business, you should keep that off-site somewhere. But that's the only one that I know of in practice. There have been a couple others where they were held hostage, like the sysadmin who held either the city of Oakland or San Francisco. San Francisco, yeah. What was that guy's name?
I don't remember his name.
Oh, he's a hero, just for being such a dope. Where he kept, he said, "I want $2 million, and I'll give you the passwords to your network back." Okay, $1 million. Okay, 50 grand and a hot dog. It just got worse and worse. And of course, they paid him, and he gave him the network, and then they arrested him. I mean, it's like, how did you think you were going to get away? How did that end game go in your head?
Wait, but he got bail money.
In marked bills. Yeah. Okay. Then there's the old-fashioned theft. Can someone walk out with a machine? Yeah. Service theft. What do they mean there? Stealing cable, stealing your wireless connection, right? Or data theft itself, actually making off with a bunch of information. Biggest data examples, breaches. Anybody think of any?
WikiLeaks.
Yeah, I guess that was you could call that theft, even though he had authorized access to it. He just gave it to somebody who didn't, right? Yeah, that's a really good one. And he was funny because he was walking in and out with those CDs, wasn't he? Yeah. He thought people. What did he say? They think I'm rocking out to Lady Gaga right now. He was actually writing this email. That was a good one. The VA lost a bunch of their data when one of their contractors took an external hard drive home, and it had, I think, the accounts of every disabled vet in America since 1976 on it. Why would you put that all together on a portable hard drive? I don't know. Constantly, we're seeing all sorts of data breaches all the time. Usually, it's something internal or something stupid, where somebody either gave it away or sold it. ChoicePoint was another one. TJ Maxx, I think, was another one. Social engineering we talked about. You're basically not using this, you're using this, right? Just talk to people. It's so easy. People love to talk about themselves. We are our own favorite choice of conversation, right? Urgency is very important. Like I said, Hi, I'm with the boss. She's locked out of her machine. We're in Orlando right now. Please, can you reset her account to such and send me the password at my email address? And as long as it's urgent enough, a lot of people will just comply. Very, very successful and cheap. Very easy to do. And like the old con men always say, it's not about me getting you to give me your confidence. It's about me giving you my confidence, and that's why you give me access.